Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Executive Director of the Linux Foundation, Jim Zemlin.
Wow, good morning, everyone. We're back. Yes. Thank you all for coming. Wouldn't you know it, though, the day we're trying to have a golf scramble yesterday, after 4 years of drought, it rains. We can't catch a break. Like COVID, fires, but we're so glad to have everyone back in person. How many people, this is their first conference or business event after a couple of years here? Wow, oh my God. That actually, I feel really flattered at this point. That's amazing. This is one of my first as well, and you're gonna have to forgive me this morning because it's been so long, I couldn't find my bifocal, so I'm gonna have to switch the glasses on and off here to be able to read things. But we have a great experience for you this week. We'll have a few housekeeping announcements at the end about our networking app, our code of conduct, the health and safety protocols that we all have. But I'd like to just jump right in right now and thank our co-host sponsors, Google and the TARS Foundation. Our breakfast sponsors, Dell, IBM, and VMware, thank you very much. Our lunch sponsors, AWS, Cisco, and Oracle. And the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, is Priyanka in the audience somewhere around here, are sponsoring our evening reception. So thank you all. It has been a long couple years, and today I wanted to take a little bit of time to be introspective about open source, sort of where we've been, both as an organization at the Linux Foundation, of which you are all an important part of, and then think more broadly about the open source community and sort of the journey that we've had. And I think it's a really good time to reflect after an unfortunate couple-year break of being unable to see each other, and a special anniversary. We are this year celebrating, of course, the 30th anniversary of Linux. I love to tell this story, and many of you have heard this before, so forgive me, of my first blind date with my now wife, whose company just went public a week and a half ago. She's one of the first, I think maybe one of a dozen chief revenue officers of a publicly traded company. She's a very type A person, went to Harvard Business School. Our first blind date, she asked me what I do, and I say, well, I work at this open source organization. It's a nonprofit. We give away software. The look of disappointment was palpable, but open source has certainly come a long way, and Linux, without a doubt, has. It's almost, I used to be really good at describing how successful Linux was. It's in the server operating system, it's 100% of the world's supercomputers. Now, it's just so ubiquitous. It's almost absurd when you describe just how successful Linux is, in that it essentially runs the vast majority of the world's computing systems, embedded systems, supercomputers, mainframes, mobile devices, enterprise servers, almost every cloud computing instance out there. It's just so ubiquitous. It's incredibly hard now to actually credibly say, yeah, pretty much all the computers. But that indeed is what Linux success represents. And more broadly than that, open source is really now the vast majority of the world's software. I love the idea of thinking of it like this code sandwich where you choose an operating system and a framework. There are so many libraries out there that you can use that are production ready to come and solve tough problems. And the world has really started to focus when it comes to creating software that powers all of the technology we use every day on that 10% of the custom code for their customer, if you're a service provider, or for your citizens, if you're a government. And that is a great thing. And that's the power of open source. Faster innovation, faster time to market. I love to think about, Facebook didn't, create their own operating system or anything. They just took, the LAMP stack at the time and went to market. The value was in a different place. And open source continues to grow. It's an exponential growth curve in terms of the amount of software that is available out there for all of us to use every single day. It is an amazing feat in collective innovation to see how fast open source has become this majority of the world's software and how critical it is to us all. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about the Linux Foundation projects. Of the millions of open source projects out there, it's sort of counterintuitive. There's actually a very small set of projects that are really the big ecosystem projects that we all collectively depend on every single day. And they're pretty obvious to most of you. I mean, these are the mega projects out there like Linux that runs the majority of the world's computing systems. But at the Linux Foundation, we have had an amazing run of successful projects. You know, the Kubernetes project, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, has changed the way applications get built, managed, and deployed in cloud computing. It really has shifted the speed at which we can build these applications. Hyperledger is the vast majority of the world's enterprise blockchain implementations, helping secure supply chains with large organizations like Walmart. It helps root out blood diamonds in the diamond supply chain in the Kimberley process. It's used to trade billions of dollars worth of bonds in financial services applications. Our automotive-grade Linux project is in millions of production automobiles around the world. Node.js, who can forget, in the OpenJS Foundation, this is the world's most popular application framework. Let's Encrypt. When the Let's Encrypt project started, it's a certificate authority, provides free TLS certificates. I think the amount of internet traffic that was encrypted at the time, and Josh, I don't know if he's around here, will call me out on this, 43%, 45%. Now it's over 80%. This is the world's largest certificate authority and is responsible for dramatically improving the privacy and security of all of us collectively. And we also have hardware projects. RISC-V, Callista's right here in the front row, is the world's fastest growing silicon architecture. The Yocto project, Kate Stewart's around here somewhere, I saw her. The Yocto project went to Mars. It was a critical part of building the Mars helicopter drone that we all know about. It is just an amazing amount of code across all of these important projects. We also have over 150 standards development efforts that we're working on. Several of these have now become international standards through our ISO path submitter process. We've had a pretty good run. I think the easiest way to sum it up, rather than quoting all these statistics and use cases and the percentage of open source in any software, I'm gravitating towards this. Open source today, decades in, is really an essential part of the global technology supply chain. Sometimes I talk to people and they say, well, open source, isn't that stuff all free and can we trust it? And why don't we just use a different kind of software? And the answer is too late. It is inextricably linked to every single technology product and service we all use every single day. Open source is not just a major part of the technology supply chain, it's a major part of our lives every day as software becomes an important part of our lives every day. And so with this, I think it's important to think about, okay, we've won, particularly those of you who've been around for a long time and people like me who feel vindicated at my wife's initial disappointment in my career choices, to think, now that we have won, what is next? At this stage of any movement, whether it's a technology movement or any kind of movement, there are just no longer easy answers. Open source is a better, cheaper, faster way to innovate. Everything should be free. It's just, there are really no longer any easy sort of platitudes. People don't need to be convinced that open source is a better, faster way to create anything these days. It is the essential way to create technology these days. And so how do we answer this question now that open source has won what is next? I think it's fitting on the 30th anniversary, and here, as we're coming back from being apart so long, to answer this question in particular. And I think the important thing, and for those of you who work at the Linux Foundation and who know our culture of being humble, helpful, and hopeful is such an important part of how we behave, I think it's important to be humble. And you could go, and there's a million quotes about magnanimous victory and being humble in victory and so forth. But I think it really is important to exercise humility now that open source is an essential part of our daily lives and is a ubiquitous part of technology. In particular, look at each other today and take this week to just also have some humility in how blessed we all are in particular. We get to work remotely on technology that people use every day. We are in one of the best paying sectors in the world in technology, when a lot of people have been struggling throughout the world. And it is an amazing time for us to all be here and be a part of this movement. I think another thing to think about is, in this period of history sort of oscillates between sort of conflict and isolation and cooperation and goodwill. Like post-World War II, there was an amazing amount of cooperation after a global massive conflict. We saw the creation of the United Nations. We saw the rebuilding of Europe. We saw just a real growth in cooperation around the world. And lately, I think that pendulum has swung in the other direction, where we are isolated, physically isolated. We haven't seen each other in a long time. But there's also serious conflict throughout the world. Trade conflict and other conflict that is concerning. And one of the things I'd like to encourage all of you to do is to help me and the Linux Foundation and the open source community be ambassadors to the existence proof that we all represent, that we can all swing back to cooperation, that it's in our human nature to work together, not the reverse. That open source is an existence proof that you can cooperate and have incredible impact while competing at the same time. I mean, there are folks here from different countries, there are folks here from different companies that are the fiercest of competitors, and yet we all work together, delivering trillions of dollars of economic value. Let's bring that message forth to the world. Let's solve tough problems together. I think that's the responsibility when you have won, and is a good way to be introspective at this time. One of the things I was thinking about when trying to answer this question about now that we've won, what should we do, is a great quote. Success can sometimes be a lousy teacher, right? You get a little cocky. Funny thing is, this quote comes from someone who I think is relevant to our community. Once again, I think we can learn from folks who have had the kind of success in technology in the past. So let's take time to revel in our success, but also let's be sober about our challenges at this moment. We're really entering a new era of challenges in open source. And I want to walk through each of these challenges with you all today. You all are the leaders in the open source community, and you can all collectively work together to meaningfully address these challenges. People are here this week actively working on these challenges right now. Cybersecurity, without a doubt, is an immediate threat to all of us collectively. We've seen ransomware attacks that have shut down power grids, that have caused chaos economically and physically for people. This is something where we can immediately have an impact if we collectively work together. The rise of techno-nationalism around the world, based on some real conflict, but also an overreach that can threaten the free and open exchange of ideas. And then finally, I think one of the most difficult things that we've experienced at the Linux Foundation is how do we catch up with this concept of being a critical part of the global technology supply chain, a critical part of everyone's lives? How do we build systems and processes to meet that moment and that responsibility, which is large? I want to go through each of these, and let's start with cybersecurity. And when I think about this first challenge, I love this visual representation. This comes from Google's supply chain levels for software artifacts, the SALSA framework. But what I like about this is that it represents, as you look at how software flows, it's important to understand how it works, how it goes from a repository to a CI/CD pipeline and eventually gets deployed to people who use that software to do interesting things. This sort of is how it looks visually if you think about it. Across that supply chain, there are certain linchpins, bottlenecks, places where there are weaknesses, and if we apply some collective leverage, those could become, instead of weaknesses, strengths. Application security practices in an open source repository, in an open source project that's critical to people. As dependencies come into a build system, as you're creating an application, understanding the health of those dependencies, having package signing services so that you can know that you're consuming the code that you should be consuming or not, and so on and so forth. There are multiple places where we can provide this kind of leverage. And it's critical that now we do this. We've been talking about it for too long. I think we understand how to identify bugs. I like to quote Eric Brewer, who's a fellow at Google, who says, "We're great at finding bugs, we're not so good at fixing them." And now is the time, because as code flows, the bad guys have also discovered these weaknesses. And supply chain breaches have increased dramatically in the last few years. Just last week, there was an Indonesian developer who maintains a critical NPM package. His identity got hijacked, his account got hijacked, and this was something that millions of folks were using, and a nefarious actor had installed malware. Let's thank our lucky stars that it was only malware and it wasn't something much worse. To address that, the Linux Foundation has taken this call to action through the Open Source Security Foundation, where this group is looking to prioritize what are the world's most important open source projects by deployment and usage and by criticality. Is it an open source package that can be used to escalate privileges? Is it network facing, right? And it turns out that those critical projects, package, version number, in rank order of criticality, is a pretty tricky thing to find out. But this group is doing it in order to then go and help fix projects that pose weakness in that critical set, to help automate the process of making sure that the dependencies that are pulled in by these critical projects are what they say they are, to help inform end users and technology producers of emerging threats, to help educate developers and users of tech in how to create more secure software and how to standardize ways of sharing that information through things like SPDX, Software Bill of Materials information. Right now, across the Linux Foundation, we have over 20 different cybersecurity efforts. The Open Source Security Foundation, I'm happy to say, just about 3 weeks ago, raised $10 million to help with remediating these threats. Google alone has created $1 million fund, the Google SOS Fund, which is available today on the Linux Foundation's LFX crowdfunding platform, where critical software packages in the global supply chain can apply to get financial help to improve the security posture of those projects. So we are working hard on this. The Open Source Security Foundation Board of Directors is meeting this Friday, and I'm looking forward to amazing work out of that group. But that's just the first challenge. I do think it's the most immediate challenge. I do think it's the one where we can have the most immediate impact. But there's another challenge around techno-nationalism. And this is something that I think is very interesting in this time of sort of global isolation to talk about. And again, I want to talk about this not being a place where there are easy answers. If we could just do one thing is not a very sophisticated way of looking at the world. We live in a world where realpolitik is a thing, where national interests are real, where legitimate trade conflict will exist and has existed around the world. No one questions that. The message is not to ignore national or regional interests, but from an open source perspective, the message is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Remember, we are the existence proof. You can compete and cooperate at the same time. That the free and open exchange of ideas is beneficial to everyone, even where there's legitimate competition amongst different corporate actors or even national or regional actors. And there are a few examples of this that we see. In 2018, the EU moved in a way that they needed to protect certain copyrights around media. So they were trying to make content sharing platforms directly liable for copyright content that users had uploaded. Seems like a reasonable thing. Copyright owners should be compensated. However, read broadly, this could read into open source software and make it extremely difficult for us all to collaborate, even though we are clearly through copyright regimes collaborating with intentionality. This is a good example of where policy that may be well-intentioned for the sake of regional competition can undermine our ability to collaborate. This is just one symptom. Another symptom, trade conflict has created confusion about who can participate in which open source project. This is another thing that we need to be mindful of. You know, I went and looked up the definition of techno-nationalism. And when you read this definition, again, no easy answers, it seems pretty reasonable. This is the idea that national R&D efforts can grow your overall prosperity, growth, and sustainability as a nation or a region, right? The key thing here to understand is that that can be true, and open collaboration, particularly through open source, can also be true at the same time. In fact, they're not mutually exclusive. They are codependent upon each other. This is something that I want us to continue to remind ourselves as a community, in particular as we start getting back together in person and borders are open. For 2 decades, the Linux Foundation has been protecting and promoting open collaboration. We want to continue to work collectively so that open source remains open to global collaboration. We need all of your help in educating regulators and industries new to open source of the impact of artificial barriers on collaboration. And we're putting our money where our mouth is constantly on this. You've seen us educating folks on how regulation can impact open source, clarifying US export control regulations and how they don't impact the way that we operate as communities. We need to continue to do this to make sure the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater, because we still have big challenges to solve when it comes to open source. Climate change is not a regional issue. COVID-19 is obviously not a regional issue, right? Creating a better way of farming, you're going to hear about today, this is not a regional issue. Open source can be a serious, impactful way of solving these problems. But it's important for us to all do that on a global basis. So we are striving to meet this challenge at the Foundation for the purpose of this large-scale global collaboration. But I think the final challenge is one of the most difficult challenges, both we as an organization at the Linux Foundation have faced, and all of you in the various roles you play. Many of you run open source program offices and large engineering teams. And one of the biggest challenges that I continually encounter in speaking with many of you is how do we meet this newfound role that open source has in society? How do we create more secure software? How do we make sure that we're sharing with real intentionality in an impeccable and well-documented way? You know, at the Linux Foundation, our mission is to support the most important projects in the world. They need secure coding practices. We need to impeccably manage IP. We need greater visibility into the health of those projects through rich metrics about not only the development itself, but the health of the community. Who's consuming the software? Are developers coming in? Are they leaving? We need ways to recruit more developers, often with extremely specialized expertise. We work with open source projects at the Linux Foundation that involve incredibly sophisticated cryptography technology. Many of them, I have worked directly with those developers, and I can literally name on one hand the names of several people who are the only folks in the world who have some knowledge to help improve these things. We need to understand who they are. We need to be able to work with them, bring more people like them into our communities. But there are serious challenges to doing this. One of the things I like to show to understand the complexity of this is that building a great open source project, which all of you participate in, is a lot more complicated than you think. And all of you have played some role in this, and some of you have played a role in kind of the overarching process of building a sustainable open source project. But as you can see, it's more than just a version control system on the internet. It involves legal work to make sure that copyright, trademark, and patents are well understood within that ecosystem. It is a set of marketing and development advocates who are talking about the value of the project and bringing new developers in. It's about convening at places like this in person. You know, the Linux Foundation hosts over 90,000 people, either physically or virtually this year, across, I think, 137 events with people from hundreds of countries all over the world. You know, in-person meetups has shown in decades of scientific studies to increase collaboration by over 45%, nearly doubling it. You know, scientists play the prisoner's dilemma game. And for those of you who don't know what the prisoner's dilemma game is, go look it up. But the main thing is, if you can see someone face to face, study after study after study shows getting together increases collaboration. So all of these things have to come together: documentation, CI/CD pipelines, various security tooling, and so forth, to make these projects really succeed to meet the modern requirements of the global technology supply chain. And the scale of this at the foundation has gotten extremely large and complicated. This is just the Linux Foundation. I'm not talking about the thousands of other open source projects out there. I mean, the Linux Foundation alone hosts nearly 29,000 virtual meetings a year, millions of chat messages. We process contribution agreements in the tens of thousands. We have over 700,000 technical contributions across all of these different projects, representing over 12,000 different organizations across nearly 13,000 repositories. It is a tremendous amount of work to keep track of all of this activity, to understand who stakeholders are, who are core developers, who are contributors, who are doc writers, who's on a board of an organization, and whatnot. And at the Linux Foundation, we have strived to not rest on our laurels and revel just in the success of Linux, although we will be doing that all week, but to try and think differently and create software that can help manage the complexity out there within these communities. And we have now built a team and a competency at the Linux Foundation to do just that. We've started creating a digital toolkit called LFX that manages all of these different processes. From crowdfunding, where today you can go and take advantage of the Google SOS commitment of $1 million, to being able to automate the process of bringing on new members and making sure that we can get people as active as possible, as quickly as possible in these open source projects. We have a turnkey mentoring platform, a community management tool. We have a community operations center that I'm going to show you today. We've got IP management tools. We've got a health and analytics framework that allows you to quickly see whether or not your project is trending in the right direction. We have a whole suite of application security and some new functionality we're going to show you today. And we have a whole bunch of indicators on the growth and adoption, sort of the last mile of your open source project. Before I actually show you some of the new functionality we have here today, an organizational dashboard that all of you are going to be able to use today to understand your organization's participation in these open source projects, new security tools, and so forth. I want to talk a little bit about the architecture of this framework that we're building to help scale open source projects, open source ecosystem development in order to meet this moment. You see, one of the most important things initially for us when building these tools is to make sure that our communities could use the tools they're already using and love. This may shock all of you, but it turns out that developers and people participating in our communities are quite particular about the tooling that they use to create that software. And what we wanted to do was to create a pluggable modular framework that would allow our communities to use the tools they love and then abstract that information for impact, to correlate it into ways where it can be used to run a mentoring program or provide better security visibility. We also are going to extend that functionality to all of you through API connections for your enterprise tools so that you, as an organization, can get more visibility into these open source projects for use in your development process, or in your open source program office, or on your security team to understand the health of these open source projects. We also made sure we built this tool in a way that is non-intrusive to the development process itself. Because it turns out that's another thing. People are not only very wedded to their tools, but if this stuff gets in the way of speed and progress and building code, folks are just unlikely to use it. We really here are aggregating this information in order to understand where are there bottlenecks in a CI/CD pipeline. Has somebody's commits consistently slowed everything down? How do we figure out who are rising stars in an open source project and who are folks that are fading away? Would you like to benchmark your organization's participation in an open source project versus the best practices of other organizations in those same open source projects? Figure out where folks who work for your organization are attending events. Are they speaking at events? Do they have outsized influence within an open source community? And then understand and drive investment to help improve security. We created this all in a way that doesn't get in the way of the development process itself. So I like to sort of think of the three big challenges, and then because everything good comes in series of three, I'd like to describe this particular last challenge in a series of additional challenges. The first big challenge here, again, comes back to security, and I want to introduce a new set of functionality in our LFX security tool today. And I'd like to explain it by helping you all understand how do we get here in the first place when it comes to security? And the answer is, not all developers are security experts. Linus and I have had conversations about this. I don't know is Linus around here this morning? You must be out wine tasting. Linus. He is here this week, but we've had conversations where he said, The thing about security is the folks in that world sometimes look at code in a very different way than the person who created that code. And I think that's such a terrific and insightful point. Maintainers, they don't have time. They're not experts. It's hard to proofread your own work sometimes. There's a ton of pressure to get new functionality out before security, and that becomes sort of a low priority. And this problem is what has really driven the way we have designed the LFX security tool. We thought if we can make any of this simpler, getting additional resources to improve security, making the discovery of vulnerabilities easier and contextualized, that would have a big impact. And so that's really what we've built here. We've built a series of tools. Our LFX Insight tool, this is a tool that provides visibility and analytics into the development process itself. We have then looked into specific security issues by providing dynamic static code analysis tools that look at your repositories, help you understand specific issues, help you triage those issues, even suggest changes for that and solutions for particular issues. And then we've coupled that all to our LFX crowdfunding tool so that people who are like-minded and want to help a project get more secure have a direct and very targeted way to invest in that security outcome themselves. The architecture kind of looks like this. Think of LFX security as an aggregator of advanced security tooling. The Linux Foundation is not going to go build the world's greatest static and dynamic code analysis across every single programming language. Instead, what we do is we allow, again, communities and developers to use the tools that they want to use. We aggregate that data and then we present it to two big audiences, to maintainers and security developers, to be able to visually look at overall security health and to be able to dive deeply down into specific issues so they can help remediate those. Again, they can do that either within the version control system that they're working on today, or they can go abstract one level up and go directly into our analytics engine to do that across a variety of security solutions. But also, and equally importantly, this provides visibility to governing boards, to security stakeholders, to CISOs, to end users, to also be able to understand the security health of open source projects in a way that they previously have not been able to do. Again, it's an aggregator. It's designed to be extensible. Initially, we started with Sneak, which is a leading provider of security tooling. So when you go in, we're building that in a way to present data both in aggregate and specifically to open source projects. But the idea is to make it as extensible as possible for all security tooling out there. And today we're announcing that we've added a second set of security features into the LFX security platform that deals with code secrets. And as a bonus, as we're looking at these different open source repositories, we're also scanning for offensive language. As part of our social responsibility, in addition to our security responsibility, we want to help improve both aspects. And I'd like to invite up the CEO of BluBracket, which is the second tool that we've integrated into LFX, to talk about the code secrets functionality and the non-inclusive language scanning functionality. Please welcome Prakash Linga.
Thank you, Jim. So as you've heard from Jim, right? So cybersecurity in general and the software supply chain security in particular are key challenges. And as you all know, there are a number of risks in code that impact the software supply chain. So hard-coded secrets in code, passwords, credentials, are a massive risk. Other sensitive information like PII or PHI should not be in code in the first place. Access management and identity are critical aspects to consider. In addition to thinking about who is contributing to your code, it's also important to keep tabs on potential attempts to tamper code as well. Things like branch protection rules, right? Code commit signing and multi-factor authentication are code configuration best practices that are a must-have. Infrastructure as code misconfigurations may lead to your production deployments being vulnerable as well. So we're thrilled to be partnering with the Linux Foundation to prioritize these unique areas of risk, right? By providing these free tools to the open source community, right, to address some of these challenges as part of this emerging category. In the first version, right, as part of the Linux Foundation project, as Jim mentioned, right, we are providing two new capabilities. The first is eliminating secrets in code. Second is remediating non-inclusive language. Right, as part of this integration, LFX leverages BluBracket to scan every single commit to detect and remediate secrets in code. New commits are also scanned real time. So a key way to address this problem is to prevent some of the sensitive information like secrets to be checked into code in the first place. So that's where we have a pre-commit tool that is precisely designed to address this problem. In addition, right, we have worked with Linux Foundation for more than a year now to really minimize the false positives in code to make sure that the information in these alerts are actionable for developers, right? And the workflows are developer friendly. We then partnered with the Inclusive Naming Initiative, right? And applied the same technology to detect offensive language in code. We suggest alternatives based on recommendations from the Inclusive Naming Initiative, right? And make them available as part of the LFX project as well. So we are proud to be inaugural partners of the LFX security project and super excited for the milestones to come. Thank you, Linux Foundation. Thank you, Jim.
So we're really excited to have BluBracket now as our second implementation partner here. And I do want to shout out to any security tooling vendors who are in the audience. It's not that we don't love you, it's that we only have so many resources. And we're going to talk about at the end of my conversation with you all today how we're expanding those resources to integrate more security tooling into the platform. But let's just take a quick look at the tool itself and walk through what you all have access now as of today. Can we check out the tool? So in LF Insights, you're able to go in and understand community growth, contribution growth and retention. You're able to understand commits within your projects and trend those over time, look at new contributors, look at commits by new contributors to make sure that you're onboarding people effectively, and organizational engagement. On the security side, you're able to see aggregate risk scoring in terms of secrets, in terms of the overall health, identify offensive language, understand vulnerabilities, dive deep into those vulnerabilities to understand where they're coming from, and even get suggested fixes for the vulnerabilities themselves. You see here also being able to go in, find secrets, be able to figure out how to remediate those as well. So it's a rich set of security features that can go as deep as you want to go, all the way down to identifying a CVE or CWE, but also as high as you want to go to get aggregate scoring. In Code and Secrets, once again, what we're doing is working with the open source community to help identify where secrets get hard-coded into a project and leaked out, and to be able to reduce false positives by crowdsourcing negative aspects of that. BluBracket also has some interesting innovation around writing machine learning algorithms to do that. And as we discussed as well, being able to go in and very quickly remediate non-inclusive language directly within your code base is something that we're looking to do with this tool as well. Finally, all of that is again linked to our crowdfunding tool that can allow you to go in, raise money for these specific challenges within an open source project and track it. So it's a pretty amazing tool. We are having sessions here this week on the tool itself. You'll be able to go in, get your hands on it. For those of you who saw in some of the non-inclusive language verbiage in there, the name David, I want to assure you that David is okay. He's an engineer at the Linux Foundation who is testing the tool. But the other words, we're looking at rooting out of our collective code bases. So that's the big first challenge. I think the second challenge is understanding and optimizing organizational impact. You know, open source mega projects like Linux and others really all similarly have this positive feedback loop in common, where a great project solves a super big need. It is used in products that you all create as products and services for end users, and then that creates profits that gets reinvested back in the project in the form of engineers who work for the many organizations represented here today to improve that code. When I talk to organizations, the 2,000 plus organizations that are members of the Linux Foundation, what they want help on is understanding how is their organization participating in these communities. Specifically, how are their employees participating? Are they committing code? Are they attending conferences? Are they getting training? Are they leaders within a community? Are they on the boards of these different organizations? Are they providing documentation? Like, how is this participation in these communities happening, and how is it meeting the business goals of your particular organization? And so to answer a lot of those questions, we have built another tool that we're going to offer to all of you today through a private beta called our organizational dashboard, which is coupled with an individual dashboard. This is a tool that allows you to go in, understand all the projects you're participating in every aspect. Who's committing code, who's attending events, who's speaking at events, who's taking training, who is trending on social media, how you benchmark against other organizations, the development velocity that you're participating in, and much, much more. This is tied then to your team's individual dashboards where they can go in, create an identity, correlate that with their work history in order for you all to get credit not only as an individual for the code you're contributing to projects, but as an institution to get code for that project as well. Let's take a look at this, which will be, again, available for all of you today via private beta to help you get more visibility into these projects. Let's take a look at that organizational dashboard. So how this works is you come in and you're able to see all the different projects that you're a member of and discover projects that you're not a member of but might be interested in or that your developers are participating in itself. You can look at the projects both from a code commit standpoint but also other participation metrics. You can dive in, see who are core contributors from your organization. You can understand exactly what code they're committing. You can benchmark your organization's participation from any metric against other organizations to see if you are keeping up with others in terms of your contributions back to this particular project. You can see it at a very granular level throughout the pipeline of code development. You can go then and understand which of your employees are attending different events. You can assign them to key roles in terms of an ability to commit to a contribution license or other things. You can figure out who's speaking at your organization at the hundreds of Linux Foundation events, how many people they're reaching in that audience, which events they're speaking at. You can see what people are talking about at different events throughout the world that the Linux Foundation is hosting. You can get a summary of them as an individual and much, much more. You can see what attendees are thinking. You can see where they're coming from a demographic perspective. You can see how many people are at this event or any other event that the Linux Foundation is hosting, and much more. And finally, you can understand how to not only see which people are being trained on a specific open source technology project, but you can see how to take advantage of free training that's available through your Linux Foundation membership participation at the Linux Foundation itself. This and a lot more. We have sessions this week. You can go in and check this out and sign up for the private beta. The one thing I want to tell you is that it's all tied also to the individual dashboard, where an individual can go in, set up their profile, link their work history through LinkedIn in order to immediately get correlation between their participation in an open source project and who they are working for at the time. We even set up the platform so that you could go in and say, I'm contributing to this code base as, let's say, an Intel employee, and this particular code base as an individual. It's all configurable. All the privacy settings are configurable for the individuals. But this is also available to all of you today as a private beta. The thing I want people to be clear about this tool is that the tool and the data are only as good as the usage, right? If folks who work for you aren't in there updating their affiliation with your organization, obviously the data's not going to be there. If you're not in there using the tool as an administrator to make sure that you have visibility into how you're participating in these projects, maybe you have somebody who was on a board, they moved to a different company, you need to put someone new in there. If you're not doing that, that data is going to be off as well. This is why the private beta. We want to work with all of you to figure this all out together and take that same community approach to creating rich data that can provide impact and insight for all of you. So that leads me to the last challenge here, which is really building and maintaining communities. You know, remember all of that complexity I told you all about? The big thing that we want to do at the Linux Foundation is figure out, how do we get this flywheel spinning a lot faster? How do we automate this work? How do we provide this work as a self-service feature to all of you? And so to do that, we have created a project control center. This is a centralized place where you can go in, set up governance, a membership structure, provision IT services, help administer developer collaboration, documentation, and more. You can get rich analytics, you can provision your favorite tool, you can monitor project health across all of this. This takes all of the complexity here and allows us to provision IT infrastructure, set up governing boards, set up membership structure, not in days and weeks or months, but in minutes. Let's take a look just very quickly at what it looks like so I can kind of help you understand what we're building here and get you all access to this too so you can help us make it better. What we've built is something where you can go into a project and you have a central control center where you can set up membership, you can set up mailing lists, you can set up wikis, you can set up legal structure, you can set up a contribution license agreement, any aspect of your community. If you have a board or a technical oversight committee, you can go establish that committee. You can schedule meetings for that committee through this framework. Those meetings will then be automatically captured. Attendance will be automatically captured. And that'll allow you to be able to understand, have people abandoned my community? Are people attending this? Hey, are we getting 50% attendance or so forth? To help us make sure these communities are healthy. You can go in and manage not only these committees, but you can manage provisioning different mailing lists and communication tools for them, whether it's email forwarding, a website, and so forth. The other thing that we've done is set up custom connectors for our Insights tool. This allows you to go in and connect to dozens and dozens of data sources so that you can monitor community health. We've not only natively set up connectors to all the major versioning control systems and connect to the data you're seeing here in this code pipeline analytics tool, but we're also creating an API framework so that you can create your own connectors, whether it's through Zapier or custom connectors to data feeds that you care about. Any data metric you need to understand your organization's health, you can do. And of course, this all ties back to the organizational dashboard, which gives you total visibility into your organization's participation in these open source projects. Now, we went super fast on just a quick overview to only tease you about this functionality, but this is available right now in this private beta, so I really encourage you to get all in there. And with that, one of the things that I want to do is invite up Shubhakar, who's our CTO and the head of the LFX engineering team, to just give thanks and appreciation to the team that's been working on this. So I'm going to invite up Shubhra to talk about the team.
Thanks for inviting, Jim. Actually, our team is more diverse than that. I forgot to put a label on East Europe. We have a huge team, and we have learned from the community, right? That's the way to build software. So in particular, I would like to call out some of the star performers on the team. I cannot go through the entire list. From an architecture perspective, I want to call out Nirav Patel, who is essentially our chief architect. On the product management side, Eric Searcy, Nadia Al-Somali, Sachin Gupta, Chaitan Sheth, and Pranab Bajpai. On the design side, Craig Ross and Stephen Bernard. On product support, and this should be the loudest clap, Heather Wilson, who probably handles close to 100 tickets from the community a day on our product areas. All our engineering leads, right? David Deal, Fayaz Ghiasi, Michael Lehotsky, Jeff Lukuya, Asita De Silva, Rudy Grigger, Jordan Evans, Thor, Tariq. And I have a long list of star developers, but I would like to thank Trevor, Efren, Ahmed, Nala, Luis, Carlos, Yusuf, Naveen, Lucas, Ibrahim, Swapnil, Khalifa, Ajinkya, Obaro, Vipin, Bharat, Shady, Lewis, Prabodh, Bharat, Anant, Rashad, and Michael. You have to figure out based on the names which locations they are in.
Nice, it's like a quiz.
It's pretty diverse, right? And it was amazing, like where we could find these people, right? Nobody ever, like me myself in my professional career, couldn't find an engineering team in Africa, right? And that was a new model we tried out. We said, well, will this really work? Around the clock, right? Product managers, architects somewhere. How do you collaborate in the space and keep the wheels running in a very agile fashion? I think the team has did this at amazing clip. We have built all of this in less than 2 years, right? But now we are at a stage where we are going to announce the limited private beta. We have gotten a lot of ideas, feedback, requirements from our LF representatives. We have spoken with a few maintainers. We have spoken with a few member companies. But we need more validation. This is the tip of the iceberg, right? There are few things we are solving. We could be doing much more. So what we'll do is we'll announce the private beta. We'll have a discourse channel where we'll do most of the engagement. There is a Jira link that we'll send out for ticketing, for bugs, enhancement requests, and whatnot. And we'll do a lot of enablement, hand-holding. But our request is to not just engage yourself, but also bring in your key employees to engage in the process. And once we actually make this valuable for members at large, then we'll go to a GA, right? So I think that's kind of it.
All right, thank you, Shubhra. Thanks. The reason that Shubhra didn't do a demo is because we would have been here till about 3 p.m. He gets very excited about the project. But there is plenty of time for all of you to hear from the team here. That you'll see them wearing jackets. The LFX team can answer many of your questions. We really, really want your feedback here. We are entering this private beta today for the folks who are here. But what we're really going to do is build a community around a community around a community, right? We want to open this up. We want to build the framework collectively. We want people coming in here, helping us build new functionality and so forth, just like any open source project. So we'll be using the open source project to create a project that is used to accelerate open source projects, and it just starts to allow myself to introduce myself, but I do want to be specific about what you can do this week. As Shubhra mentioned, go in and log in today. If you don't have an LF ID, create one, start using the tool. We spent a lot of time on working on role-based access controls. One of the things that we really want to get right are data privacy, making sure that people understand where we got this data, how we use this data, and how they can make this data private or, in fact, delete the data. So all of that are things where we'd like folks' feedback on. Check out the Innovation Center where we have our engineers on staff to walk you through it and ask about the beta program. So I went a little bit over time this morning, but it's been so darn long, I feel like I didn't do that bad. I'm only a few minutes over. But I really do want to thank you today for coming back, being a part of our community. We have not been sitting around in COVID just waiting for it to end. We've been working very hard to innovate and to help accelerate collective innovation and solve some of these big challenges that I've outlined today. So with that, again, thank you, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker. So our next speaker is from the Next Arch Foundation. So we have a new effort of over 40 companies, I should say, across the globe, specifically in Asia-Pacific region, that have started a new organization called the Next Arch Foundation. We've just got tons and tons of new stuff that we're going to be telling you about all day today. This is a project that's focused on building a contribution community for next generation architectures, specifically around the increasing array of microservices up there. To talk more about this effort, we have joining us from Asia via video, Mark, Shan, and Jeff Wittich. Can we introduce them via video?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeff Wittich, the Chief Product Officer at Ampere. Welcome to this call today, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the Next Arch Foundation. We also have Mark Shan from Tencent on this call today. He's the chairperson of the Tencent Open Source Alliance. I've had a great experience working with Mark, and he'll speak to you more in a little bit. Today, we're going to talk about Next. Even though I can't actually see everybody, I hope you can enjoy the presentation. Let's dive in. Next generation has been used in technology scenarios to describe innovations in technical architecture. Clearly, new technologies and concepts will mature and iterate at an even faster cadence going forward into the future. Compute requirements will grow by multiple X over the next 5 years, which will require innovations in performance and power efficiency that go well beyond what we've seen over the last decade. It's no surprise that technical stacks are constantly changing, with the widespread application of cloud native, big data, blockchain, open hardware, and other technologies that enterprises are using to gain competitive advantages. This will surely continue. The result of this situation is that they need more industry solutions, more integrated solutions, and joint hardware-software architectures to address the challenges of digital transformation, productization, and commercialization. But tackling these problems brings even more technical difficulties. Solutions often are case by case, and they have high thresholds. With the rapid development of heterogeneous architectures and multi-cloud scenarios, the scope expands even more. To help enterprises manage new businesses and scenarios in the future, Next Arch Foundation is coming together to solve the compatibility problems of different frameworks and protocols. Ultimately, it will lower the threshold for using components in a heterogeneous architecture. Today, many traditional enterprises are choosing to pursue more technologies for digital transformation, and they want to shorten the development and production time of new business products. But when they do that, they're going to meet new challenges like high thresholds to use multiple components, compatibility in heterogeneous and multi-cloud solutions, and improving the performance of computing. And across the industry, we'll see challenges like the lack of common solutions causing there to be a high cost of innovation. We'll see many industries facing various challenges across open source, integration, adaptation, ecosystem, and technology, and the growing need to accelerate the application implementation process. We'll also see the need to build intelligent plus centralized architectures and break the disconnect presented by each distributed unit. And for commercialization, two typical challenges are: how do you integrate the new technology with business and maximize the potential for business applications? And how do you rely on the new architecture or re-engineering to empower the change of the enterprise business model? Next Arc stands for Next Architecture. Considering the need and the difficulties to build the next architecture, Mark is going to bring us the vision, the mission, and more of the Next Arc Foundation. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Jeff, for a great summary of the challenges we will see during digital transformation. I do want to point out that many new open source projects have actually solved problems in multi-cloud, heterogeneous architectures, and compatible historical architectures. But for various reasons, they are often not well connected, and a neutral home for them is missing. With that in mind, NextArc Foundation hopes to include the next generation technology architecture that is more suitable for open source projects, developers, and enterprises to promote business growth. And NextArc Foundation will achieve this goal through an open and neutral open source ecosystem. This vision of NextArc is to be a neutral home for building an open source ecosystem of the next architecture, which is suitable for enterprise development and promoting technological innovation and business growth. And we will start with the mission by developing a next generation microservices architecture for heterogeneous infrastructure design, showing the actual problems. With the future in mind, NextArc Foundation will expand its focus areas step by step. NextArc will focus on evolution, application, and commercialization of technologies in major areas. This includes CI/CD, cloud, containers, virtualization, data and analytics, DevOps, IoT, network communication, and edge computing, open hardware, storage, web, and application development. And NextArc Foundation will focus on new applications solutions, integrated solutions targeted for industries such as automotive, gaming, healthcare, media entertainment, retail, and telecommunications. In terms of organizational structure, NextArc Foundation will have TOC and end-user community for the overall planning and development of the foundation. TOC is responsible for the technical guidance of the foundation's projects according to their characteristics and development stages. And it will conduct monthly TOC meetings to discuss and review the incubation of the open source projects. The discussion topics can include technical areas, technical frameworks, technical standards, industry applications and solutions, and others. And there will be special interested group, SIG, that focus on specific topics together and discuss new architectures, processes, and approaches in different fields. The end-user community will be a great platform for companies and organizations to meet and form alliances in developing new technologies and projects for the next architecture ecosystem. Building and improving the next generation architecture requires the joint efforts of the global open source community. And right now, NextArc is committed to making that happen in the current open source ecosystem to avoid enterprises from being limited and locked by vendors, More than 40 companies are willing to support a neutral and non-profit foundation under the Linux Foundation that can integrate upstream and downstream open source technology resources. Here is a video that comes from the collaborators of NextArc. Okay, let's watch what they said.
We believe that this is a great initiative to take software development to a next level, and as Coreage.io, we assure our active contribution for the success of this initiative.
We are fully aligned with NextArc's vision of building heterogeneous infrastructure, and we are committed to working with NextArc's members of building the next generation.
I'm pleased to see the establishment of a neutral and non-profit NextArc Foundation that will help integrate upstream and downstream open source technology resources.
I hope the NextArc Foundation can help us quickly find the current best practices for open source software development.
Multi-cloud is the future, and it's great to see such a wide set of collaborators coming together to make heterogeneous infrastructure more accessible to all the development teams out there. Congratulations on the launch.
I'm very happy to join the NextArc Foundation, and I hope that we can contribute more to open source projects in cloud native, API, and microservice.
There are actually more and more members coming in. We hope that the NextArc Foundation can flourish, and OGA will work closely with NextArc Foundation in the future.
We congratulate the Linux Foundation on the establishment of the NextArc Foundation. We are happy to be a part of this endeavor to develop a next generation microservice architecture.
By being part of the NextArc Foundation, AgTech hopes to build a next generation technique architecture to better serve customers around the world. Congratulations on launching the NextArc Foundation.
I thank all the collaborators for taking part in this joint initiative. And if you, after watching our talk, become interested in NextArc Foundation, I encourage you to reach out for more information about NextArc Foundation and join us. We look forward to building architecture for the future together. Thank you all of you here. Have a nice day.
All right, well, that is a good example, once again, of the global collaboration that happens within our communities. I also want to announce a quick new project called Open Bytes from the Linux Foundation. This is a project to make open data accessible to all. Go check it out on our website. This is spearheaded by Gravity. It's a community of developers and data scientists that will create data standards and formats that enable contributions from anybody out there. So this is an interesting way to provide more accessibility into that data world. Go check it out. So our next speaker is working on something that I think is really interesting and is going to impact a challenge that we all are going to face not only now but in the future around food security, around climate change, in an entirely new sector for open source development. Johal is the head of the AgStack Foundation here at the Linux Foundation, and they are helping to build a platform for sustainable agriculture and help scale the digital transformation in a somewhat traditional industry. Please welcome Johal.
Thank you, Jim. Can everybody hear me? Yes? Okay, great. Boy, thank you and good morning. It's nice to be out of sweatpants. Oh boy, I feel jeans a little tight, but yeah, it feels good. Feels good. It's wonderful to see everyone. Thank you to the Linux Foundation, to Jim, for organizing this wonderful event. And one of the key things that I want to talk about is taking off of some of the comments Jim made this morning, this fantastic presentation. And the title of my talk, which sort of leads from some parts of his, is when we think of agriculture in the context of human history, we are faced with this very interesting kind of question. Are we, on one hand, faced with a Malthusian trap, a Malthusian dilemma? Or is this a big innovation opportunity? Thomas Malthus, for those who don't know, was a British economist in the 18th and 19th century. And he predicted that food production happens linearly, but population growth happens exponentially. So the two intersect at some point, and we have a problem. Of course, he didn't predict the Industrial Revolution. And so he didn't predict the response that society would have to that kind of exponential growth. But we face unprecedented challenges to our food supply. Unprecedented. From global droughts that are created really through climate change to an increasingly aware and demanding population of the world that is growing. And the agriculture societies, people who actually create our food, are some of the most vulnerable and economically disadvantaged communities in the world. That's where our food comes from. In fact, ironically, we're in Napa Valley, surrounded by agriculture. This is one of the bountiful agricultural communities in the world. So there's a lot of talk in agriculture about sort of gloom and doom. There's a lot of questions to be very concerned about. But it is, and one of the reasons why is also because the industry is in such disarray. A third of the food that we create is actually wasted. And about a third of our people in the world are hungry. Now, what other industry can you think about where a third of the value being created isn't even used, right? It's in terrible shape. And that presents, in my humble opinion, the second choice, which is, I think this is an opportunity of a lifetime to actually innovate through technology and through data. The last dozen years of my career have been focused in AgTech, where I've seen the growth of some of the most interesting innovative challenges. And what I'm hoping to do today with a few slides is really ask you to think about and come and engage with us at the Linux Foundation as we're launching a new chapter, really a new open source community called AgStack to address that. So that's sort of the highlight of what I want to do. Let me take you through a journey of sort of some of the compelling cases that I think are part of this framework. So really, I think the key thing to think about here is, what is agriculture? Before we think about, how to solve the problems, what do we mean when we say agriculture? So agriculture is a massive, diverse, and globally spread out ecosystem. It is not just about farming either. So it's everything to do with creating food and regulating food, transporting food, processing food, researching about food. There are researchers here. And so it's a hyper-connected constellation of stakeholders that are really spread across the globe and are at different scales, from very large industrial scales, the ones we're used to here in the United States and in other industrial countries and developing countries, to very small scale. I grew up in an agriculture family in northern India, and in our village, people had one cow, one buffalo. That was their source of livelihood. And I was fortunate enough to come to the US, get a computer science education, and be in tech, to be able to see how that tech, this tech that we're creating, can actually make a huge difference, massive difference in communities globally. And so really it's important to really appreciate the vastness of agriculture. It's a $25 trillion economy that employs half of the world's population. And actually, I was sort of amused when Jim said, well, we've won, now what next? And in tech, we think we've arrived. But actually, if you talk to people in ag and say, hey, what's open source? They wouldn't know what to tell you. I was thinking, does a farmer in India know what open source is? Heck, does a farmer in Fresno know what open source is? Right? And so I think we've just begun. And very much to Jim's point, he had a slide that looked like a hamburger in the top and bottom. So what we're really doing is taking a look at all the tremendous work done by the tech community. Can we actually collaborate on one of the most existential and inherently collaborative industries of the world? Food is not always made for our own consumption. the Salinas Valley in California or Napa Valley create food that goes all around the world. Within 24 hours of lettuce being harvested in Salinas Valley, it's on somebody's plate on the other side of the planet. That is what agriculture is. It's a lot bigger than you might think. So having sort of talked about agriculture, let's talk a little bit about AgTech. The last decade has really seen an incredible growth, what may seem like sort of the golden age of AgTech. AgTech, some would say, has arrived. I would beg to differ. AgTech is just starting out. In fact, AgTech suffers from all kinds of challenges today, because of which it is growing because the need is so big. It's, let's say, 5% or less of the total venture capital investment in the last year or so. But it is the tip of the iceberg. There is a huge ecosystem to be built. Tens of thousands of companies are being formed today, but that's less than 1% of what is possible. So we have early validation. We have early indications that this could be an incredibly fruitful journey for technology. But really, is it? Are we really creating value to really get adopted and change the ecosystem, or are there inherent friction points which can be addressed through open source and collaboration? And to that point, the biggest challenge that AgTech faces today is the same challenge that people have faced in application development 20, 30 years ago, before open source was a thing, right? Everybody's creating their own silo. And everybody's thinking they're doing great because they're protecting all their IP. But 70 to 80, sometimes 90% of what they're creating isn't even proprietary. It's just the same thing again and again. And they do it out of necessity. We do it out of necessity. I lead an AgTech company for the last decade. And so that necessity is essentially when someone is trying to create an innovation to do something, let's say they're doing irrigation management or they're doing some sort of supply chain traceability. Think of it as an application that is like a car or some vehicle that goes from point A to point B. It satisfies a function. Well, in order to go from point A to point B, those folks, those application developers have to build their own road. They're building infrastructure that should be reusable, but it's not easily accessible by many. As an example of that, NOAA puts out 180,000 weather stations updated hourly since World War II. Global weather is actually available for free. But is it accessible? Not really. Very hard. All kinds of technical reasons. None of them are proprietary. Accessibility is a huge issue. Cost of development. How much does it take to develop an app for the Android or iPhone, ecosystems? Not that much. Why? Because there's a whole stack of reusable components which one can use. Not so for AgTech, okay? So the cost of building, maintaining, and reusing this is just totally lost. So everybody's spending hard-earned VC dollars on building all this code that really should be reusable. And it's non-proprietary. The proprietary piece is just the top 5-10%. Of course, interoperability, switch the user now, not the developer. So here's a farmer. Let's take the most savvy farmers in Central Valley in California, tech savvy. These guys often have private planes. They're doing very well economically. And you ask them, hey, what do you think of my app, right? They said, well, how does it work with this other app? Well, no, but I'm helping you do irrigation management. Yeah, but that guy's helping me with the tractor, and that guy's helping me with nutrient management and fertilizers. And by the way, I have to do this app for the state regulator. And by the way, when I have to harvest, I have to send this data to the ag commissioner. I have all these things. When I'm a producer, I have hundreds of apps. None of them talk to each other. And so what do? They go back to how they were doing it before. And so no progress gets made, adoption slows down, there's friction, and a lot of money and time gets wasted. Interoperability is a massive problem in AgTech. Nothing talks to anything else. Okay? Everybody wants to be the platform, and nobody is. And of course, last but not least, there's trust and privacy. It's a massive issue that folks, for example, at Hyperledger are trying to fix as well. But they're just trying to look at one piece of the equation. There's all kinds of trust issues around accounting for carbon, for water, all kinds of ideas coming out that are very important for our planet. But until there's trust, verifiable trust, you can't have it. So those are the things that are reusable. And that's really the idea behind this. And very much like the computing history, the days before the operating system, the days before Linux, right? Imagine not having an operating system. Every application has to write to hardware. Once you got the operating system in, what happened? The number of applications just took off. They could just write to an OS spec and be done with it. That is what needs to happen in AgTech. And that is precisely what we are building at AgStack. We're building an OS-like stack to essentially create the reusable components for proprietary applications that people can build so that we see this exponential growth in AgTech that we've seen in other industries. How are we doing that? So we have essentially 4 major color-coded pieces that come together in this stack that I'll briefly mention. It's mostly on our website. You can go check it out. Those are frameworks, models, data, and utilities and services. So let's talk a little bit about each one. Let's talk about models first. There are over 250,000 researchers just in the UC system, of which more than 20% are actually involved in agricultural research. These folks are creating pest models, nutrient models, soil models, fertility models, all kinds of models for all kinds of things in ag. But there's no repository for these models. There's no standardization. There's no reusability. There's no inheritance. There's no object orientation. There's no Python repo. What if there was a unified repo where not just the University of California, but the 100 land-grant universities in the US and the thousands of universities all over the world could actually publish and subscribe models that were version controlled and managed. And so you could have this massive outbreak of models that we could use and not have to hunt for a research paper to try and figure out how to build a small evapotranspiration code or what have you. That is the models piece. So we're building our own repo. Same thing with data. A lot of people are into machine learning. We see equipment companies buying, making acquisitions for, they call it see and spray. They look at something, machine learning figures out what it is, you spray it. Well, where's the data for the learning coming from? What if we could create a syndicated data set that allowed every participant in the world, as they're observing various bugs, various diseases, various things on a tractor, a broken rod, what is it? How to fix it? And create a place where that information, which is already public, which is already open and already free, can actually be organized. That's our data repository part. Think about services. I mentioned weather. How about just a simple API to get the weather anywhere I am? How about if I want the weather for the next 20 years? There are models. Instantiating those models for my location, my lat long. Simple APIs that can take the world's data and provision it to use in any language by anyone, anywhere. And frameworks. There already are frameworks. How about taking some pub sub buses, some asynchronous chat pieces, and tweaking them to create that trust and privacy switchboarding, allowing people to download and be used interoperably with these models, data, and utilities. Those are the 4 pieces that we're building in the stack, which really sits between the application and bare metal OS. So that's what AgStack is. I want to tell you a little bit about some exciting early projects. We just launched a few months ago, got about 18 members, and some of the core projects that are getting a lot of attention are actually things that work with each other. So this graphic is sort of meant to depict the interdependence, codependence of these projects with each other. I mentioned the weather, so I won't belabor that. That's an active project where we're taking all of the NOAA weather as a starting point, and then every single country has its own weather system. And we're basically putting those weather systems, weather monitoring systems, in the same repository as a unified API to create a single, easy-to-use global weather API for the world. But the recommendation and tagged image libraries, we're creating the first models and recommendation tagged image libraries for pests, so that an ag extension worker who's communicating with their crop advisor or with their farmer is able to take a picture of a bug or a disease and find out what it means, what is it, and how to manage it. And that information gets syndicated in a tagged image library. And actually, both those systems use a pub-sub network. So those are the three active projects. Again, these are infrastructure projects on which applications we think will blossom. Why should we care? And that's really the most important question. Each one of these three elements is just 3 out of thousands of reasons why we should care. Let me give you some examples. Think of the world's water supply. We've just come through a drought. Thank God for the rain. Awesome. But we are actually in a perpetual 20-year-long cycle of drought in the western United States. West of the Colorado River is in a perpetual state of drought and has no sign of turning, right? Agriculture uses 50 to 70% of all fresh water on the planet. So how do we use water more efficiently? If data can help us in the advent of volatile weather to really address the day-to-day needs of a field anywhere in the world, it can make a huge difference. A massive difference where literally the governments of different regions don't have to think about taking bottled water to their communities because they're going to run out of water. That is the reality we face. Let's look at pest and disease management. With climate change, it's not just crops and weather that is affected. That weather actually affects the phenological growth cycles of pests and diseases who have evolved with the plants. Actually, there's a systematic function in which these pests can be modeled. And so if we're able to forecast and predict where and when we have pest infestation, not only can we reduce our chemical loading on the fields, but we can actually be better at reducing yield loss. And we need food to feed more mouths in the world. It is an $8 billion industry today, serving the needs, and still about 2/3 of the waste that I'm talking about in developing countries happens because of pest and disease. So we can reduce that with data, with tech. It's a massive impact which puts dollars into the pockets of those vulnerable people who actually make our food. If you ever had coffee this morning, where do you think the coffee comes from, right? Comes from people who grow coffee. And of course, last but not least, you got to come to the money, right? Agriculture is a massive economy. It's a balance sheet of the world. The oldest balance sheet next to gold is agricultural land, but also lately water, and most importantly now, carbon. There are all kinds of new ideas around how to account for carbon, because when a plant photosynthesizes, it actually sequesters carbon. How can we use carbon markets to incentivize better management practices, better sustainable agricultural practices at the farm level? We need the underlying infrastructures of trust, we need data, we need tooling, and that cannot and should not be built in a bespoke way by every single application developer. It should be reusable so that we can do it yesterday. And so, where does that leave us today? I think we're sitting at the opportunity of our lifetime. I think very few industries have so much possibility for improvement that agriculture does. It would make any engineer sit up and say, how is this even possible? We should do something, right? So we need you to help us do that. We need your help engaging with us, debating with us. Why should we do it this way? Why not that way? We're just starting out as a community. We have a long way to go. We're where Linux was 20 years ago. And hopefully, maybe not in 20 years, 5 to 10 years from now, we should be able to say, we're done, what do we do next? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, certainly one of the things we want to do at the Linux Foundation is take on big challenges. And our next speaker has certainly done just that. I'm going to struggle introducing Jenny and the Linux Foundation Public Health Initiative because many of you know that effort was under the leadership of the late Dan Kahn last year, who passed away right around this time. But Jenny has taken the reins and has done an amazing job on this important initiative. The idea here is we immediately focused on contact tracing and exposure notification during the pandemic. But I think the bigger goal is to create a free and accessible digital toolkit to work on future pandemics. Please welcome Jenny Wagner to the stage.
So, Samara, I do know what you mean about pants not fitting the same as they used to. It's definitely, that resonates. And thanks so much, Jim. It's fantastic to be here, and definitely is a different sort of position than we looked at when we were starting LFPH off a year and a half ago. And it is really rare that you get to legitimately claim that you've worked on software that's saved lives. It's even more special to be able to claim that you've worked on multiple areas of software that have saved lives. And at Linux Public Health, we get to say that every day, and it's such an honor. Born out of the pandemic, we set ourselves up to respond to the crisis at hand. And I think one of the really important things to note is that it's not about just responding to the pandemic, right? It's about looking forward. It's about figuring out, what are all of the different ways in which we can grow. And so I'm going to be talking about some of that today. But first, I want to tell a little bit about our story, about some of the things that we have accomplished in the past short period of time. Our community, I'm so proud of what they've accomplished. We've got 1,800 different people who've gotten involved in LFPH in some way or another. This is whether they've been contributing to our debates about how this technology should be built, contributing to our projects, helping with marketing, helping with policy, connecting us with public health authorities around the world. A huge number of people all joining together for that. Because of that, we've actually talked directly to over 52 states and countries worldwide to give them advice on our two key areas of focus, on exposure notification apps and on vaccination credentials. And they have, a couple of them have me on speed dial, where it'll be like 6 at night and if somebody's calling and asking about, I've got to figure out between these two texts, what should I do? The governor wants an answer in 2 days. We have been seeing growth in that. We're talking to them every week. They're calling us, moving forward, and joining also in those conversations on what the technology should look like, because they realize that the policy and the technology need to come hand in hand. And what all of this means is that at this point in time, tech that LFPH has touched in some way or another is running on 250 million phones worldwide. This is what we can do when we all band together, when we work openly and collaboratively. And it's been a really short period of time, right? We all went home back in March 2020. In April, LFPH was a conversation between Jim and Dan that was just like, is this something we should do? Is this a space we should play in? Just an idea. We launched in July of 2020 with exposure notifications and our 8 premier members. We added in vaccination credentials as our second area of focus in December. And by the beginning of this year, we were the go-to reference for anything related to these two tech areas, for the media, for governments, for researchers. We were getting calls constantly coming in. We weren't having to go out and search for them. They were coming to us because they knew that the Linux Foundation is a name that they could trust, and they knew that we were doing good work and moving this forward and had the answers for them. And this momentum has continued to grow. We're at the point now where public health authorities introduce us to others, to their peers, because they say they were so helpful for us, they provided us with unbiased advice, and now you should talk to them too. And this is what that looks like. All of those countries in blue are those countries running some piece of tech that we have touched. It might not be our code base, but it is tech that, because of these open debates that we have had with everybody out there, because of this open collaboration, we have influenced what technology they are running in their countries. And it's actually not up to date, because when I had to submit these slides, I then got calls from more places. So Turkey should now be highlighted, as well as El Salvador. So I talked to them last week. But point being that it's growing, that there's this momentum. And some of this happens also without anything that we have to do with, right? One of my favorite things is that during the exposure notifications work at the beginning, we woke up one day to discover that we had a large crowd of Europeans who had suddenly joined from on our Slack channel. And I pop into this channel to see what's going on, and it turns out that they decided that they were going to use the LFPH Slack channel to develop the European Federated Gateway Server, which is the server that allows all of the European countries to share their data around exposure notifications and reopen their borders. And they just decided that we were going to be the place that they do that, because we were an open community that had their values. And it was a great way also for us then to connect with them. And then we discovered they did it again with the vaccination credentials. Again, woke up one day to discover the EU had created yet another channel in our space. So it's really something where you get this international growth, where we're getting collaboration and participation from all over the world. And it's because we're doing this the Linux Foundation way, right? And this is something that Dan was so insistent on, and he really drilled in to make sure that it was going to be a part of our culture from the beginning, that we were going to be committed to openness, security, privacy, making sure that as we're rolling this technology out, even though it's an emergency, we're doing it right, because we have to be protecting everybody who's using this technology. We can't just say, oh, it'll be a little bit of time. Brian Bellendorf, who took over from Dan, likes to tell the story of how he was participating in designing the original internet cookie, and it was supposed to be a short-term thing that was just going to get them to solve this one little issue. And here we are today, and everybody knows the pervasiveness of cookies. We didn't want to do that again. And so this open collaboration, good debate, building things right, these are the pieces, that the foundations that we laid within LFPH to make sure that we're moving forward and doing things the way we want to. And this has been great also for our members, right? Nearform, who contributed their code that they built for the Republic of Ireland, COVID Green, they then managed to use that to get contracts with a whole number of other clients across the world who also needed exposure notification apps. That code base has become the foundation for so many different countries as infrastructure. We've got IBM, who was the first to launch their production vaccination credentials here in the US with New York State. They're now one of our key partners working with us on international interoperability of these vaccination credentials, taking that leadership role. And so all of these things really, I think, are just the incredible collaboration that we've achieved in such a short period of time. And one of the things that amazes me about this is that this is also a paradigm shift for the public health authorities we work with. They're all used to government procurement and government tech, where it takes years to get anything out the door. The pandemic allowed them to say, no, we need to move fast. We need to actually get this stuff done. And so we started seeing things happen in weeks and months. And when I talk to them, they say, we don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to when it takes forever to get something done. We want to keep moving at this pace. Can you help us? And so just because we've started with the pandemic doesn't mean we're stopping there. I think that we all have realized that public health is not something that just belongs in the role of governments. It's something that impacts all of us just a little bit as we stand here in this room, all wearing masks, and thinking about social distancing constantly and all of those challenges, right? So we really do need to make sure that we're thinking about all of those things. Health security is a word that I don't think anybody knew even just a year ago, and is now a huge topic in boardrooms. Companies are realizing health security needs to be a part of their strategy. And so these are some of the different ways that we're seeing the pandemic change approach to public health, and why we think we're positioned exactly right to move that forward. And there's a lot of, we're in the right place at the right time. These numbers are a couple of the numbers of the current appropriations bill that's in Congress in the US. We are seeing huge amounts of investment worldwide in public health, a 24% increase in funding to the CDC, an 18% increase in funding for health and human services. And whether it's anywhere in the world, whether it's corporations, whether it is governments, foundations, everyone is moving forward with investment in public health. So this is the time to be getting involved to take advantage of this market opportunity as well. And so what does forward look like? We are going to be moving to the next slide. We're enabling a 21st century response to disease. And so what that means is that we are going to be thinking about opportunities like using AI for personalized recommendations, to get to make sure that the feedback we're giving an individual doesn't have to be a blanket feedback for every single person within a community, right? How can we use AI to get there? How can we connect all of the healthcare IoT devices that they are running and get those into a system so that they can all talk to each other and get the right data out. Health equity is a huge issue for so many companies within healthcare. Are they actually moving health equity forward and making it better? How can we be a part of allowing them to see and map what that actually looks like? And putting patient data into patient hands, empowering patients through giving them control and using all of those decentralized technologies we're developing throughout the rest of the Linux Foundation to feed back in there so that we're making sure we're empowering them in the right way. So these are some of the different opportunities that we see moving forward. To talk more about that, please do join us with our brand new Executive Director, Jim St. Clair. He is going to be talking about the trends he's been seeing in public health and his experience within the industry for many, many years this afternoon. The breakout room is now called Silverado East, and we hope to see you there. I really, thank you so much, Jim, for giving me this opportunity to work on such a meaningful set of projects. And I am really looking forward to having more in-person events, being able to hug people more again, and making it so that we don't have to just spend all of our time talking about COVID anymore. So with that, thanks so much.
Thank you. I talked earlier about how you can have cooperation and competition at the same time. And at an all hands a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that we also talked about is how proud we are of a world where you can have impact, where people can get paid well, where we can have family values. When Jenny goes out on maternity leave, someone's going to come and cover for her. To be able to do all those things, they're not mutually exclusive. We live in this lucky community where we get to do all those things. It's just an amazing place to be, and I'm really fortunate to be a part of it, and lucky that we have such incredible, talented people here with us today. Our next speaker is one of those talented people. Ali Fenn is the president of ITRenew. At ITRenew, Ali oversees revenue and leads the company's circular data initiatives, including market development and business model innovation. She has experience in open innovation, and today she's going to talk to us about data center sustainability and the transformational opportunity of open hardware. Please welcome to the stage Ali Fenn.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and also in person. My first event in person in a long time, too. So, as you guys just saw, software, open source software, has the immense, powerful, positive potential to solve our biggest needs and opportunities. And it's no longer, technology and software is no longer an industry. It's underpinning every single industry, right? I'm going to talk a little bit about something different. We're going to talk about hardware, and we're going to talk about sustainability. And the reason it matters to you guys is that all of those software applications run on hardware. And thank you, Sumer, for teeing up the carbon topic. That's what we're going to talk about, because sustainability is not just renewable energy. So I'm guessing most of you have never heard of ITRenew. I think of us as Silicon Valley's best kept secret. We've been around for 20 years. We provide a series of data center services and solutions to participants across the ecosystem, from the world's, almost all of the world's largest hyperscalers to system builders globally, and increasingly to enterprises and cloud service providers in kind of the broader markets beyond the hyperscalers. We'll come back to kind of what that looks like in a little bit. But fundamentally, we're in the business of enabling and orchestrating a global circular economic model for the hardware industry. What that means is less of a linear model where we take things, we make them, we dispose of them, and more of architecting an economic model where we think about maximizing the lifetime value of equipment, physical equipment, and maximizing sustainability of equipment in a model that's more kind of regenerative and less wasteful, right? You see circular economy in every industry, from food to fashion to whatever. It's super important in the IT hardware industry, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why. But first of all, I mean, everything you've heard about, this will be a surprise to nobody. What we are doing in technology globally is it demands massive, massive capacity expansion and scaling of infrastructure, both in data centers, increasingly at the edge, and so forth. This is just a handful of stats. Infrastructure Nations just put out recently a report saying 104 gigawatts of data center capacity currently, growing rapidly, 7 million data centers globally, massive amounts. That doesn't even include the crypto mining work that's going on. People have probably seen on pace to 175 zettabytes of data in the data sphere. A zettabyte, by the way, 1 zettabyte, one of my favorite stats, is that 1 single zettabyte is equal to every grain of sand in the world, in all of the world's beaches. It's pretty unfathomable scale. Data generation, right, enabled by 5G, smart everything, remote everything, autonomous everything. This third stat is that 1 autonomous vehicle creates as much data in every hour as 3,000 human beings. It's an immense amount of data that is being created, processed, stored somewhere, right? And it's all on hardware. 75% of data is going to be generated at the edge. The forecast is 2 times the amount of servers will be at the edge than is in cloud data centers. Think about the unbelievable growth that entails in terms of hardware, new hardware. Sumer, you also touched on water. There's some data out there saying that the data center industry alone already consumes as much as 45% of the total clean available water. Think about that for a second. It's not going to agriculture. That's a kind of a problem we should be thinking about. And this last one is just 5G connections, going from 10 million to 1 billion in a very short amount of time frame, right? So all of this, just think about explosion of hardware. And the question is, the next question I have is often kind of, are our heads in the clouds? Everybody writes code, they click, 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 and mostly there are no servers running anywhere near you when you're doing that. That's because they're all sitting somewhere else. But the consequence of this equipment is very, very significant, right? There are some people forecasting that we're going to literally run out of minerals for electronic components in the next 20 or so years. We're going to mine the deep sea beds. Seems like the wrong idea. We have 57 million tons of e-waste happening this year, on track to go to 75 million. That seems like the wrong idea. And by the most extreme forecast from an energy perspective, the global ICT industry is forecast to go from 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions to 8%. That's the wrong direction, right? We're all supposed to be going the other direction. From a waste perspective in the data center industry specifically, this Gartner said in 2019 there were 65 million servers in data centers deployed with 50 or more racks. adding about 14 million servers a year between then and 2023. That should get you to about 120 million servers deployed in those data centers. But the number is actually 75, which means that the waste is also huge. So there are about 45 million servers coming out of those environments. So I'll come back to what the potential impact does if we could think about doing something different with those servers. So first, let me say we've made tremendous progress in data centers on operational efficiency. From a PUE perspective, from a renewables perspective, from situating data centers in greener places like the Arctic Circle and so forth, we've made huge bounds in efficiency, not only of the hardware, but also of our data centers, and that's fantastic. And we need to keep going. That's like, we need to win that battle, right? But we have to ask the question of, if we're only looking at the use phase energy, the operational phase energy, are we looking at the whole picture? And I think it's a worthwhile say, okay, if we succeed in getting everybody to renewables and our operating energy is really, really, really efficient, then where do we look next, recognizing that we have this massive explosion of infrastructure? So we did that at ITRenew. We did an analysis, a full life cycle analysis of data center equipment. And we did, whoa, am I really at 3 minutes? It was supposed to be 20 minutes. All right, we're behind. So we did this. We looked at the full life cycle analysis, everything that goes from raw materials and energy into equipment, how that equipment is manufactured, where it's manufactured, where systems are assembled, where they're run, and then how they're treated at the end of life. And it turns out when you do that, that pre-use phase, manufacturing, is super, super important. In a very common deployment model, that pre-use phase is more than 3/4, right? So again, assume we continue success on operational phase energy, we have to think about manufacturing. And supply chain carbon, what's called scope 3 or embodied emissions, is a massive, massive place for us to look to think about sustainability. So then the question is, what if we could enable second life for equipment? What if we could defer all that new manufacturing? Think about those 46 million servers. Obviously, not all of them are well suited for a second life, but what if we could enable a second life? And it turns out that there's a very significant impact to doing that. So you will see here that operational energy increases a slight bit when you extend the lifetime in aggregate. In this model, we were extending from a 3-year life cycle to a total 9-year life cycle. But your embodied, all the new manufacturing energy goes down significantly, resulting in about a 25% savings overall to the full carbon picture tied to IT. To give you a sense of where that fits, that same 24% would be equivalent to getting another 68% operational. So think about the leaps we've made on PUE. We're already in the best data centers at 1.06, 1.07, whatever. We're not going to get another 68%. That's super hard, right? So we got to look to the next places here. Now, it used to be that doing the right thing from a sustainability perspective was more expensive. It was either less convenient, more expensive, whatever. There were a lot of good reasons that people said, hey, I can't do that. I'm running a business here. The good news now is we are truly at a win-win inflection point where to do the right thing from a sustainability perspective also both maximizes the full lifetime value of those assets by thinking about lifetimes in their aggregate, and it reduces the system level TCO significantly, also kind of a corresponding 24%. So zooming back out for a second, what does that look like? If we were able to create second lives for those 46 million servers, that's about 31 million tons of carbon, almost 7 million cars equivalent annual emissions, right? It's a significant opportunity. Now, again, obviously, we can't do it to all the servers. We have to responsibly recycle some of it, but there's a huge opportunity to go do something much more responsible from a carbon perspective by creating second lives. So what does it look like in practice? This is the business that we're in at ITRenew. This has been developed over the course of the past 20 years. Importantly, and why I'm here, is that it's completely enabled by open, right? So we've always been able to decommission equipment from hyperscalers and harvest valuable components and sell those components to system builders globally. We've always been able to do that no matter what the hardware was. But with the shift by the major hyperscalers that we work with, think of the Facebooks, Microsoft, Googles, everybody that operates these massive fleets of servers, they've all moved to open and ODM hardware over the past numbers of years. And what that does is it enables us to do much more interesting things with the hardware. So instead of saying, hey, we'll strip the valuable components, we'll sell those, and we'll recycle responsibly, now we can keep all the racks, all the chassis, all the power supplies, all the switches, everything else, all the servers, all the storage out of the waste stream, defer all that new manufacturing because it's open, which enables us to do the necessary configuration, reconfiguration, recertification, support, warranty, all of that stuff that makes solutions then useful and accessible by the broader markets that have different needs than the hyperscalers do. So you see, this is, we facilitate internal reuse. That's a great thing from a lifetime and sustainability perspective. Then we sell racks. We transform nodes into edge form factors. Then, of course, we harvest components, and of course, we recycle. And the idea here is as regenerative and at least wasteful a model as possible. What does it take? It takes open, right? So open is the whole backbone of this. So when we think about open, we think about the Open Compute Project. We think about open systems firmware, OpenBMC, Linux boot, all of these kinds of things. Obviously, RISC-V is a big one coming as well. Currently, a lot of this is x86. And then it takes kind of this global orchestration and logistics, reverse supply chain, all of that stuff. Supply chain, obviously, a super important piece of the puzzle right now. Jim mentioned it in a slightly different context, but the hardware supply chain is radically disrupted right now. And we have resources that are available to the scale of millions and millions, literally flowing through the ITRenew facilities every year. That creates a whole new asset class for people to continue to go faster with the digital transformation and operate much more at the speed of software, which is a key piece of this as well. Importantly, and I think this is kind of part and parcel to the Linux Foundation, is this takes not just services and products and engineering. It takes a kind of a community, a shared ethos, an ecosystem coming together to say, hey, let's think about how we do things better in a more innovative way for the future, in a way that lets us capitalize on all that positive potential, in a way that is not like, kind of, that we also get holds on sort of the negative underbelly of everything that we're doing from a hardware perspective. Quick view of what it looks like from a hardware perspective. Rack scale solutions, best-in-class hyperscale technology. We sell this under the Sesame brand name. Just think about it as any OEM kind of a rack. 50% TCO. Think about it as certified pre-owned BMWs, right? You used to be able to buy a car at the BMW dealership or at like Ali's Auto Body. Now we have the biggest category in the market, which is certified pre-owned. Somebody else drove it off the lot. It's cheaper, still performs exactly the way that you would want it to perform without compromise. A lot of what we do is under open systems, Kubernetes environments, people who are doing cloud native, people who want to be in the slipstream of hyperscale innovation, people who want the simplicity, ease, cost effectiveness of public cloud, but they need to do private for any reasons, whether it's data governance, latency, cost, repatriation, whatever. Also converged, AI/ML. The idea here is, and again, this comes to the speed, and complexity is, roll it in within 60 to 90 minutes, your workload is running. That's our promise to customers. Have it in 3 to 4 weeks, operating in 60 to 90 minutes when you roll it off the truck. So the idea here is make open hardware kind of the currency that open source software has become over the past 20 years. Open hardware has further to go. We're starting behind, but it's ready and it's happening now. Wrapping up here quickly. Servers are absolutely the lion's share of the embodied carbon or the supply chain carbon that are in data centers, but we can think bigger than that. So we have some partnerships that we're working on. We've published a case study with a company called Block Heating in the Netherlands, with whom we are sitting modular data centers next to greenhouses that the heat is all recaptured and then heats those greenhouses for all the tomatoes and everything else, whatever else might be growing in the Netherlands. And this math is from a company called Eco Data Center in Sweden that's also a partner, where they've done an analysis. You see here scope 4, which is kind of the unofficial scope 4 of the greenhouse gas protocol, which is avoided emissions. And you can see at the data center level, they get to a reasonable number, about 48. It's a total of negative 33 kilograms of carbon per kilowatts of carbon. And if we add recertified IT to that for the same workload, it triples the benefit. And so you can truly run a climate positive data center for the first time. Taking away kind of the conclusion here, energy is not the only renewable resource. Hardware can be a renewable resource, and it is all about the supply chain. This 6X is Carbon Disclosure Project reporting. Supply chain carbon is generally, on average, 6 times that of anybody's operating footprint. In some cases, it's a lot more than that. Things like construction of data centers, 40% construction is of total worldwide energy use. That's manufacturing stuff, right? That's all of our scope 3. And then back to the 75% tied to IT. So we have to think about this problem of carbon that goes into manufacturing, the infrastructure that all of our stuff runs on. And it's not just a hardware problem. It's an industry problem. It's our collective responsibility. And candidly, I think there's a huge opportunity, back to what Sumer said, on carbon accounting, credit, transparency. We have to expose all of this stuff and begin to create the right incentives, the right accounting mechanisms, so that people can know what's happening and can have the right behaviors. And I think that this is a massive opportunity for the open community, the Linux Foundation, the Open Compute Project, all of us to come together and say, no, we're going to leapfrog the way that things have been done in the past and drive this forward so that we can do all the wonderful things we want to do with technology in a way that's not kind of contributing to the code red climate situation that we have at hand. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for being a good sport on going quickly there, but I love this. We have a new project that we launched this year called the Green Software Foundation. This is a set of standards for reducing the carbon consumption of global data centers. Microsoft kicked this off. They have other industry partners. A bunch of us are going from this meeting to Glasgow next week. All of this stuff is interconnected, and I do think it is a hidden secret of Silicon Valley ITRenew, and let's hope that we get your profile up, because this is something that's important to all of us. I want to wrap up here with a few quick announcements. Breakout sessions begin in 30 minutes at 11:30, so maybe 25. Happy hour tonight at Arbor Courtyard starts at 5:30. We have shuttles running to downtown Napa for folks who want to go to dinner. We don't have a scheduled dinner, but I hear they have good food around Napa. And another quick reminder, on Thursday we have a gala celebration for 30 years of Linux. It's black tie optional. You can go any direction. I will be wearing a tuxedo, but you're no obligation at all. We have also a board over at registration where you can sign up for open spaces for unconference sessions that you want to do. Our Brella application is available for networking. You can check your badge for the Wi-Fi and all of that. Please remember, we have a code of conduct. We want to make sure that people feel welcome and safe here. Please follow all our health and safety protocols. Please respect that we eat in the designated eating areas, no food and beverage in the meeting rooms. So with that, we're going to have a quick break. I want to thank you all for joining this morning. Go check out some of the new tools we have to get this open flywheel going even faster, and thank you all for coming today. Let's hope next year we have twice as many people in the room, but we're getting back slowly but surely here. Thank you all for joining. We'll see you tomorrow.
My trophies. Some are loyal soldiers while these other thorns are rosy. And if you never know who you can trust, then trust me, you'll be